Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of us who have joined us for the first day, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Africa Innovate. My name is Frieza Mary. I'm the founder and CEO of Learning Connected. So Africa Innovate is our conference hackathon delivered in collaboration with the Africa Centre, taking place from the 21st to the 23rd of July. And our goal is to share knowledge and develop innovative solutions for sustainable development. Our conference and hackathon focuses on the following interrelated sustainable development challenges: economy and employment, clean energy, which we'll be discussing today, also environment, education, sanitation and water. Yesterday, we explored ICT, community, health and well-being, and economy and employment. The goal of our online expert discussions is for us to uncover gaps, challenges and opportunities for our hackathon participants and wider community to take further and develop innovative solutions. So that was my very short introduction. And now I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. Today we have with us Nicholas Mukisa, PhD researcher, Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand. We have Catherine Munyarari, the project coordinator from Scene Connect, UK. We have Dr. Philipp Trotter, an honorary research associate from the University of Oxford. And we have Shakur Ahmed, the former CEO at Sunlight and the current energy specialist at RTI. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you everyone who's joined us today. Some people joined us yesterday. We have some hackathon participants as well. So I would like us to begin with an informal introduction. And I would really love you to share your career trajectory and to share how did you actually end up working in clean energy on the African continent. So I'd like to begin with Catherine.
Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Munyarari, and I work at Scene Connect. How I got into this space was really a love for Africa. And I felt that, there needs to be a way in which we make innovative clean energy technologies gender and socially inclusive. So this is how that passion is what really drove me to where I'm at today. And for the past 2 years, I've been coordinating projects in sub-Saharan Africa, where we're actually, through research and development, we're testing out different technologies, but also different business models to allow for better clean energy access and ensure that, communities in hard to reach areas are able to gain access to energy, but also utilize it to meet their needs.
Fantastic, thank you, Catherine. How about you, Shakur?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shakur, but I usually go by Shakur. So just to give you a quick introduction on how I actually ended up in the energy sector, it wasn't really a quite clear cut. It wasn't just like I wake up overnight and I decided to go to the energy sector. It was like a process. So I remember back in college, I studied financial management for undergrad. One of our lecturers asked us to sort of come up with a social issue that we would like to address, so that if it is a major social issue, then they will invite the relative stakeholders in Somalia. So as somebody who grew up in rural parts of the country, who never had access to electricity when I was young, and when my family moved to urban centers, realized that how electricity was very expensive and thought maybe it's just like a luxury thing for the well-off people. That day I decided to write about electricity. And I wrote something along the lines like why people in rural areas do not have access to electricity and why people in urban centers pay so much to have access to electricity. So something like that. And eventually that sort of, earned attention, and thankfully my college that time invited some of the relative stakeholders in Somaliland, which is the northern part of Somalia. And from that on, actually, I decided to write my thesis project for undergrad on electricity consumption trends in rural parts of Somaliland, and then started to work for a utility company in Somaliland. So it was that process that actually led me to eventually find a rural electrification company and work for RTI, which kind of facilitates regional cross-border power trade. So that's a little bit of introduction of myself and how I ended up in the energy sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakur. How about you, Philip?
Hi everyone, my name is Philipp. I'm a researcher at Oxford University, and thanks a lot for having me, Farida, and for organizing this fantastic panel. Great honor to share this with you. So I'm an energy engineer by training. So I guess like this was always, you know, from an engineering side was always my interest and passion, especially focusing on renewable energy. But how I came to Africa is very much kind of, you know, working in Africa is mirroring what Catherine said. Is really a passion that I've always had for the continent. I don't really know where that came from. But probably when I was 18 years old, the first time I was outside of my home country of Germany, like that was, I went to Ghana, and it was just, I mean, I was an 18-year-old kid, right? I didn't know anything, but it was a fascinating visit there, because I was struck by kind of, you know, if you see the German standards and what we Germans like to complain about and be miserable all the time, even though we have all these things. And then I experienced so much like joy and so much dynamic, you know, inputs, and it was just absolutely breathtaking from, you know, people that had on average so much, you know, less than what we have here. And like that kind of that inequality on all these different levels really motivated me to kind of switch focus completely. I was working at McKinsey for a little bit, you know, as a consultant, but like I never was really satisfied. So I kind of completely kicked that career out of the door and just yeah, focused on Africa, and been extremely happy ever since. So it's really, yeah, kind of trying to apply my knowledge to some of these dire challenges that we have to unlock some of these unbelievable potential that is there on the continent.
Great, thank you, Philipp. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Nicholas.
Hey everyone, my name is Nicholas. I think my story is just more or less same like others, but my background is in physics. So when I was doing my bachelor's, I came across a bit of courses in renewable energies. And I think how I got so much into renewables is after my first degree, because when I got my first job at the university as a teaching assistant, I got myself so involved in a number of projects, mainly in water. And around the same time, I came across the opportunities of African Union. I think African Union was offering scholarships for students to pursue masters in renewable energies. And that's how I got into much renewable energies and research. And what really struck me most is when I started doing my masters and on up to now, is that I discovered there is a lot of resources Africa is blessed with that has not been even, you know, looked at. So I think that's why it has caught my attention and my interests to, you know, do much research about Africa. So I think that's really my short background and introduction.
Thank you very much. Now, all of you work in related areas. So I would like you just to share more on a recent project that you have been involved in. What challenges did you face related to clean energy on the African continent? And I'd like to begin with Shakur.
Well, now these days I involve a lot on working with regional, specifically East Africa development partners to facilitate cross-border power trade between East African countries. And I think the idea is to sort of have the technical and operational readiness between these countries so that the infrastructure needed is there to sort of evacuate clean energy sources from one country to another country. And I think it's a really good way to make sure to promote and scale transitioning to cleaner sources of energy. But the challenge is, you know, when you're working with so many different countries with bureaucracy, it's very hard to get a coordinated planning from different countries. For example, I think in the last 50 years or so, Africa used to have a lot of, shortage of generation. But now every country is kind of increasing and building their generation for the sake to sell to neighboring countries. And it's projected that a lot of East African countries will eventually have a surplus. And it's good to have enough or sufficient power given that a lot of people don't have access to electricity in East African countries. But when you have administrations or governments that aren't really talking to each other, it's hard to, first of all, tackle these domestic energy access issues. At the same time, get the coordinated planning across East African countries, so that a lot of things are decided not only the most cost-effective way, but also in the most environmentally meaningful manner. There are some countries that are endowed more renewable energy sources that are good at generating these sources. Some countries that have higher skills on operating these systems. So the problem is really getting governments to plan and coordinate together, not only in the short term, but also in the medium term.
Thank you. Nicholas, what is your research focusing on at the moment?
I'm kind of working on business models. So I've been proposing a couple of business models for renewable energies. My emphasis main has been on solar, and I'm looking on ways how Africa can exploit the available solar resource. Because Africa has like 40% of the global solar resource potential. And it's amazing that the entire installed capacity in Africa is way too less compared to what we are capable of doing. And even those that have really tried to exploit the resource have really done it on a small scale. So I'm proposing ways like how such renewable energy can be exploited, where schemes like net metering and feed-in tariff scheme failed, because feed-in tariff scheme really failed completely in Africa. However, it succeeded in Europe, and particularly in Germany, it really did very well. But in Africa and maybe most of the other developing countries, it failed completely. So, and I think this is the challenge that we have, like our countries adopted something that was not designed or planned for them. So they jumped on something that was already established. And I think they did not look at how to implement it. So I'm trying to look at means that developing countries can adopt, to do business, but as well as to supply or to meet their energy demand. Yeah, so challenges I've had is like getting information is really tricky. It's very hard in Africa. If you ever want to find information about some countries, it's really close to impossible sometimes, because websites, you try their websites, they don't update information. You try the people maybe in the organizations or industries you think that are really have the access to information. There's no willingness to share information. And I think this is what is hindering the research sector in Africa, particularly in the renewable energies. So I hope maybe as we go on and as generations transform, would we have improved access to information, especially with since we're in a .com era, information should be available online, maybe in their databases, so that we can have a connected comparison of states in Africa.
So Shakur and Nicholas, you've highlighted issues with bureaucracy, access to information technology. I will come back to Catherine and Philip regarding the projects you're working on. However, I want both of you also to comment on what kind of challenges are really, do you find are hindering your work on the continent? I'll ask Philip.
Yeah, it's a good question, Farida, and it really depends on the context. I think if I think about, so as I work on, there's different sectors within renewable energy and clean energy, right? So there's the electricity sector, which you can roughly break down into everything that is on grid and everything that is off grid. And then of course, energy doesn't stop with electricity. You have clean cooking, which is a huge issue as well. So if I just from those sectors, just pick out, off grid energy, which is, providing energy solutions to remote communities. What I've really been struggling with, not necessarily in my work so much, but the people that really do these mini grids and implement them, is really a general hesitancy to embrace innovation from the side of those organizations that should enable it. And by that, I mainly mean the finance community, as well as the public sector, both domestically and internationally. There is a huge Africa is, many African countries are risky in terms of, finance, right? So they always want kind of a proven business model. And if you don't have, a proof and a very clear-cut business case, and you can demonstrate, here's 10 pilot projects that have worked beautifully, unless that isn't the case, investors always want extremely high interest rates, right? So, but the challenge is, I think everybody knows that we need business model innovations in order to get to affordable electricity prices for rural, customers who don't have high purchasing power. And the thing is that these business models actually, they exist. There's really fascinating. I'm very happy to talk about them more at a later stage. But you can get prices down and achieve economic development, not only energy access, but go beyond that. But some of these innovations have really struggled to have a proper regulatory framework in the domestic countries, have international support, and have financial, international financial and domestic financial support, really, because some of these integrated solutions that we're seeing that go beyond just providing energy, that really want to, go into productive uses of energy. How can we monetize kind of these productivity gains that we get through energy? That there's so much latent potential there, but unless it's proven, nobody's really putting money against that. So that's really hindering innovation. And really, kind of this conference is all about Africa Innovate. I think, what I always find is if I work a lot in East Africa, there's so much innovative potential, but oh my God, do these African entrepreneurs have to struggle to really get their innovations, ready to market. And I think that's really this enabling environment is something that I see as the biggest challenge.
How about you, Catherine? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think for me, I will probably reflect on that question from two angles, looking at the off-grid electrification angle and also looking at it from precision solar-powered irrigation. So from the off-grid angle, if we look at the scene on a macro level at the moment, we know that about 59.2 million people currently in Africa gain access to electricity from solar home systems, and about 1.1 million gain access to electricity using mini-grids. The thing with these dominant systems at the moment is that they're very limited in terms of their infrastructure. So just taking, for example, solar home systems. If a person who has no access to electricity, so that's defined as, tier 0, wants to gain access to electricity, so maybe just very basic, that's more like tier 1, tier 2 energy access, they'll need to purchase a solar home system. Now, as families grow, as people's energy demands and needs increase, in order for someone to actually gain more energy to power the different appliances that they demand, they'll need to purchase another bigger, more expensive solar home system. So that can be a challenge, especially for people living in communities where they do have very low incomes. Another issue as well, especially with solar home systems, is that it can't at the moment power more of these productive use appliances that Philipp was talking about. So what we know is that if we want to achieve sustainable development, we need to look at ways in which energy is a vehicle to achieving economic development. And that's economic development from the perspective of how do we actually allow people in communities to maximize the agricultural potential that they have and actually add value to their produce, and then take that produce to then sell to output markets. But in order for you to do that, again, you need a system that allows you to do that. And then when you look at mini grids themselves, when they are initially sized, when developers size them, they tend to be very much oversized. And when we think about the time that it takes to actually reach full grid integration, communities can't wait that long. And we need to have a system whereby we can connect communities, people can meet their energy needs, but also people don't actually have to spend a huge amount to increase their energy. So this is actually one of the projects that we are leading at the moment at SEAM called Project Emblem, which I'll talk about a bit more later. And just touch up a little bit on the small scale farmer irrigation side. One of the challenges that we have found with the project that we did in Uganda was that Africa as a continent is abundant in terms of natural resources, and agriculture accounts in some countries, and Uganda in particular, to 60% of the country's GDP. And most of these small-scale farmers are the ones who actually contribute to this GDP. But how do we actually improve the levels of access to these smarter irrigation systems or technologies is one challenge. And another challenge as well that needs to be discussed is around traditional issues around land tenures. So how currently people organize themselves, and some of these systems can be very difficult to formalize them. So if we're actually thinking about the way a government needs to organize to then allow people to access resources, if the systems are not formalized, it may be difficult to actually target funding and target efforts into specific areas. But that's a project which I think I'll talk about a bit more later in the conference. So yeah, those are just like some two key areas of focus, I think.
Thank you, Catherine. My next question is, what role do you feel entrepreneurship plays in tackling the sustainable development challenge of, well, in promoting clean energy? So Shakur, I'm aware that you initially set up Somlight. It would be great to hear more on why you decided to set up and how you set it up and the impact that it had.
So great question. And I think before I even get into answering to that question, I would like to emphasize that I definitely agree with Catherine and Philipp that off-grid systems is the way to go to extend energy access to people who do not have access to electricity, specifically remote and rural parts of Africa. And I think entrepreneurship has a role to sort of fill the gaps that the public sector cannot, and deliver the services where I think the larger, market-oriented companies or institutions usually are hesitant to step in because of maybe lack of information, because of markets are not mature enough for their services and all that sort of things. And I totally agree that there is innovative business models that can actually bring services and products that could tackle the existing energy problems. But oftentimes what we see in Africa is that the enabling environment is usually missing. So if an entrepreneur is addressing certain issues, they might end up doing a lot more than they were trying to address. So for example, let's take the example of Somlight. When we started Somlight, my co-founder and I were only thinking what would be the most suitable products and financing mechanism for off-grid rural communities. And that time we thought small solar lighting systems would be the most appropriate. But then later on, we run into all of these other problems, things like road accessibility, limited internet access in some areas so that we get real-time information. And I think although entrepreneurship is the way to go, unless there is a level of enabling environment, the success rate is going to be limited. And I think this is where not only entrepreneurship is addressed, but also government institution roles is focused so that the enabling environment for these entrepreneurs to thrive is there. Things like access to financing, infrastructure, regulatory framework. A lot of countries, specifically East African countries, were not really allowing independent power providers until very recently. So everything was done through, state-owned utility companies that, as Catherine said, is not really effective to increase and extend such centralized grids to off-grid rural communities. So I would emphasize, usually entrepreneurs, face the challenge of finding the support and filling sometimes the role of the government, which creates enabling environment for them.
So we've all highlighted there's a real need for government support. So entrepreneurs really do need more support in this area. So my question to Philipp is, I saw that you were a mentor to some social entrepreneurs, and I'd like you to share a bit more. We have some hackathon teams who are focusing on the theme of clean energy on the African continent. What advice would you give them? What advice would you give our attendees or someone who might be watching this video later who wants to set up an enterprise, but they really don't know where to go? How can they set up a business? Where can they get support?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things here that you need to think about. One is you of course have to have some kind of idea, right? And this idea needs to have some kind of merit in order to attract certain funding, right? So you first, of course, have to work on your business plan, and you have to think, just kind of, if like day one, you pretty much have to, you probably already have kind of a rough idea of what you want to do, but to really firm that up and see what is out there. There has been a lot of writing actually just in the last 3-4 years on business models in the clean energy space in sub-Saharan Africa. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. Try and look at what other people are doing. There's 54 countries on the African continent, and many, not all countries are there's huge differences between these countries, but some of these challenges might be similar across different countries. So you can really learn a lot by just having a look what other people are doing. There's a lot of NGOs and organizations put out very interesting and insightful reports on how to combine, how to come up with business models that can work. So I really would say, that has to be the first thing. My specific advice here, where I think, this whole sector is trending towards now, and we've heard it here in this discussion a couple of times already, is really energy for productive use. I think what people have to, if you're an entrepreneur, you might again be a bit ahead of like where the public sector is, but I'm sure that everything is going towards this productive use thing. So I think that's kind of where the big, kind of the big potential is. And so I think there's a lot of merit for entrepreneurs to look at how can we, actually use electricity in order to have productive uses of electricity. Maybe I can just give you an example of an entrepreneur that I was working with. So this is a mini grid company originally, and they just wanted to put a mini grid into this village, right? So they costed it out, and with all the logistics costs of the project development cost, the batteries, the solar, everything that you had there. Actually, the solar PV cells were only like 7% of the entire cost. Like, it's all this project development stuff, all this other stuff. If you just put that in there and have no subsidies at all, you need to charge around like $1.50 even per kilowatt hour in order for you to make that work, which is absolutely unsustainable. In the UK here, I pay 1/10 of that, right, for my electricity. So that makes no sense. But if you then come in and say, I have a mini grid system that not only powers households, but actually, I have some kind of what people refer to as an anchor load, where you have, a business that maybe you even yourself could end up running, which is what this Ugandan company did. They then actually became a fish cold chain company, and they implemented all these fish cooling units and had those assets. And it turned out that the money they had to spend on these extra assets was maybe another extra 10 or 20%. But by using electricity, producing ice and selling that to the fishermen, reducing, food loss, increasing output, and stuff like that, it was profitable to sell a kilowatt hour of electricity around $1.5. So you really were there where you needed to be without subsidies. So if you can kind of cross-subsidize between your different businesses and really think about it in an integrated way, that for me is where really the meat is. Now, the second step then for entrepreneurs, when they have that figured out, is of course they need to have some kind of communities where they can do it. They have to partner with the local government and have to follow local regulations and stuff, and that always takes a while. But then, of course, it's getting out there and trying to get finance. And quite frankly, there is a lot of finance being thrown at this issue right now. You have international organizations that fund a lot of these types of projects. GIZ in Germany, for instance, they do a lot. World Bank has these grants. There's a lot of grants actually out there, and then it's really about coming up with a business model that makes sense, trying to get early on, a lot of grant finance, and then trying to scale and kind of reduce the grants as you go along.
Thank you, Philip. Catherine, you mentioned that you wanted to elaborate on one of the projects that you're working on. Please do so. I think you mentioned it was Emblem Rwanda. Yeah,
so to answer your question as well about, using that experience from Emblem and, advice for entrepreneurs, one of the things that I would say that we have found is that think about providing energy as a service. And, you know, there is quite a lot of products that are already there on the market, and there's a lot of innovations that other companies have already done before you. So think about what other services could you provide to actually grow that customer? Because energy itself is not an endpoint. Energy itself is a means. So if you think about once you have connected that initial customer, how else can you actually grow that customer as their demand grows? So think about like, what other ways could you stimulate demand from the customer? So that's one particular learning. Another learning as well is that IoT technologies and metering is something which is going to be very important for any entrepreneur that's looking to work in this space, because, you know, how else do you actually know that your product is working? How do you know that your performance is efficient? How do you know that, you know, certain issues where they are cropping up on your system and you need to then send the right labor to resolve these issues? So think about, you know, how you can make your technology smart and efficient as well. Another learning is that we know that mobile phone use in Africa is very prevalent. And I think there was a paper that was released just recently, which said that there was about 747 million SIM connections in Africa. So if we already think about the fact that, you know, a lot of people already use mobile phones in Africa, how can you actually allow people to gain access to other services through mobile phones? And this doesn't only have to be through smartphones. This could also be through maybe SMS controlled communications. So what kind of information could you communicate to your customers? How can you create a feedback loop so that you can improve your service, but customers are able to communicate with you and maybe find out more about other offers? So think about what ways in which, creative ways that you can actually use mobile phones in your innovations. And then I would say like a really key important one is very much understand the supply chain, understand the actors that are at each supply chain level, understand the agriculture value chain. So if like, taking the example that Philipp was explaining about cold chains, if you look at the area in which you're working, what is it that people are currently doing at the moment in terms of agriculture? Where are the inputs coming from? Where are the outputs going? And then if you were to put in a productive use application, what part of the value chain are you improving the efficiencies of? So this is really about having that user-focused design. So as opposed to just designing a system that you think in your head, like, okay, I think this is what's required, that's needed, you're actually designing something that really covers the needs that the people in the communities or in the areas that you're trying to reach really are saying, this is what we need.
Thank you, Catherine. Nicholas, your research focuses on clean energy accessibility and affordability in developing countries. From your research work, I'd like you just to give us a brief introduction, but I also would like you to provide us with some suggestions for entrepreneurs who would like to pursue, who would like to develop a business in this particular area. What advice would you give them based on your findings?
One of the aspects maybe I could speak of first is in one of my research work, I proposed an approach where we look at the sustainability livelihood framework. It's called Sustainable Livelihood Framework, and it has 5 capitals where it's mentioned society does not only have problems, but also has assets, which may be also called capitals, which is social network, like social capital. We have physical, human, and finance. So if you're looking at implementing a business in a community, you have to look at how you're going to impact these 5 pillars that like govern community, because every society stands on these 5 pillars. And you should see how your business is going to bring about positive change in society, because if people are not going to benefit from your system, they will not adopt it. I'll give an example. I think Catherine talked about solar home systems. Solar home systems have been in Africa for now, I think 5 or plus years. And if you talk to the people in the business, they're saying small systems or the less than 20 watts, they're phasing them out. Why? Because clients are not paying, clients are not responding, or the business people are not getting profits out of the small systems. And I think initially the systems were intended to provide power or energy access to people in rural areas, considering that 20 megawatt is mainly about phone charging and a few lights. However, business are growing. So these business people cannot keep on selling 20 megawatt when they are middle class earners who are willing to buy over 100 or 1 kilowatt system. So they've advanced and moved on, whereby people who are in middle class can afford paying maybe upfront cash for a kilowatt, other than for the 20 watt people in the rural area. So I think there's a shift, and in the end, the intention of implementing solar home systems will not be achieved, because we've shifted from going to the rural people who cannot afford the big systems, but companies now are moving back into the middle income class. And I think that's going to be a challenge. But I think if someone is looking at doing business in the energy sector, one aspect is people have not looked at in Africa is the aspect of bioenergy. People have not looked at bioenergy, the potential of how much we can save our communities by doing business in bioenergy. Everyone is looking at solar, that's perfect. But we should start thinking about developing movable, transferable digester systems, even so that if you're going to supply, if you're doing business in solar, you sell someone a complete system, a digester and all the mixing parts. This one will be easier than where they have to construct underground digesters. And also another thing is the aspect of sensitization. Our people are not informed. If you buy a solar system, for instance, of 20 watts, for them, they would think they can put a television, they can put other big powered consuming systems, because now they have access. However, that's not the case. So many business people, companies, will sell to them and tell them you've got access, but they don't tell them the limits. And this is giving bad name to their systems, because if I buy a 20 watt system and it's only meant for 4 lights and phone charging, but I end up putting a television on it, the system will break because I'm drawing more current than it can supply. In the end,
that's not communicated at all.
Pardon?
It's not communicated with the user at all.
So what happens is that because when you buy a system, it's your system, you run it. But some people have exploited. Of course, some come with a small battery. But systems have to do, if you want to buy to incorporate more appliances, you upgrade. So if you have one battery, maybe you may have to get a second battery and additional solar panels. But if you don't do that and just connect a television on that one battery, it will not serve the purpose for which it was intended. And if that happens to you, the client will just complain that your systems are not genuine. They do not serve the purpose. However, it's their side to blame. So I think as people go into this business, we have to look at this is a service. We are offering a service to our people. Ensure that other than looking at only the profit margin, look at also sensitizing, because there's word of mouth. When your people use your system, they will market it. And if the people give good feedback about how you handle your clients, how your system is genuine, how you're accountable, you do not have even to go to radios to make advertisements. Rural people speak to each other. They have a network, they have a social network through which they communicate. And if you achieve such targets, business will prosper, will succeed. But also, I think, as I conclude, that we need, at a bigger scale, we need to have a connection between the institutions like universities and the industrial sector interconnected, especially in Africa. If in countries like Germany, and I think also I've seen it in South Africa down here, institutions have a connection with the private sector or the ministries, for instance, like in the energy. So developed systems developed and proposed in the university by students are adopted by the sector, or the sector suggests topics of research and study for university to work on. So this means that universities are providing solutions to the society other than just providing solutions to no problem at all. So we may end up providing solutions, proposing things which actually are not meeting the demands of society. So I think we need to bring in that link to connect institutions with the society so that we exactly answer the exact needs of society.
Thank you. And that's really emphasizing a point Catherine made, that we really need to be user-centric when we are developing a business or a product or service. I really would like us to focus on a few points to support our hackathon attendees. Catherine, you have a point that you wish to add, so please do go for it, and I'll come in a bit later on with my question.
Yeah, this is just a quick add just onto what Nicholas was saying. So one of the things that I'm super excited to actually tell a lot of you guys about is a concept that we are trialing at Scene called Evolving Grid. And with this Evolving Grid concept, what we are trying to look at, and this is a trial that we're doing currently at the moment in Rwanda, is can we take these solar home systems? We already know about the limitations in infrastructure of solar home systems and mini grids, but can we take these solar home systems, interconnect them to form a nanogrid? And what this nanogrid would allow is people who have this grid to trade energy. So this peer-to-peer trading, what that then facilitates is, as if, for example, myself, I don't really use a lot of the energy that I create, but let's say Philip maybe requires more energy. Can I sell that energy then to Philip and I make an additional income from that trading? And this is a concept that, we are working on, but I just wanted to bring to you guys' attention because it's an innovation. And, it's one of the ways in which we believe, like, through this way of, doing energy trading so that it's actually owned locally by the communities. As people's energy demands grow, we can't keep installing new systems all the time. And we can't wait for the grid to reach these communities. So we need a solution that, is prevalent and is, active right now. So I urge everybody to keep a lookout at what we're doing at Scene Connect with Project Emblem, because, some of these new innovations, we really are testing some of these things out. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Catherine. I also would like to let our attendees know that if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A area and we'll address them at the very end. Also, if you would like to have a certificate of attendance, please don't hesitate to email us and we'll provide you with that. Okay, so on to a couple of points that I would like us to address before we sadly come to a close. I would like to ask everyone, what do you feel are any emerging trends that are really shaping clean energy on the African continent? And I'd like to ask Shakur.
I think that would be something already discussed about. As we said many times, innovation was something that has been seen many sides of the power sector, whether it is using mobile money penetration for payment collection and information gathering, whether it is demand management by just sharing the energy that's already being generated, as Catherine just mentioned, instead of installing additional solar panels. And I think also a lot has been done. I mean, one of the issues that usually, solar hesitants will point out is the issue of intermittent and storage technology, things like battery, how it's not still to the level or scale that it's needed to be, a large-scale energy source, and how, recycling of solar panels and batteries are an issue. But in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a lot of progress has been made on technology-wise, at the same time, cost-wise. So I think solar technology and batteries are, I think, for now, one of the cheapest sources of energy, competing almost any other sources of energy if it's not, there. So I think one of the emerging success for the sector is how the technology, specifically solar, is becoming more reliable and affordable in the last 5 to 10 years. I think that's one thing I see would significantly contribute to the sector.
Thank you, Shakur. How about you, Philipp?
It's an interesting bit, because sometimes I'm caught between kind of, what is the actual trend versus what is the opportunity. So I believe that currently those two things are extremely far away from each other. I think Africa, I would go so far to say that many African countries have a transformative opportunity in terms of economic development in this global move toward decarbonization. That is probably the biggest, single economic trend that we are currently undergoing, and that won't change in the next 1 or 2 decades. Will probably be accelerated. Now, we have heard here on this panel that Africa has 40% of solar energy, and some of the cheapest and the best, not only 40% on total, but also some of the best solar energy on the planet. Still, the total electricity produced from solar and wind in Africa right now is 3%, right? 97% is produced by other sources, only 3% by solar and wind. And we did a study, it was published in a Nature subjournal, where we predict that is not going to increase a lot in the next 10 years. It's going to stay below 10%, the solar, so pretty much the non-hydro renewable share, which to me is mind-boggling, because we don't really see a trend in the pipeline unless, a rapid shock occurs. And I think that shock should occur not only for energy specific purposes, but I'm more talking about industrialization. And for me, there is so much potential in Africa to build the industrial sector on its abundant and cheap renewable energy. I've been working in the chemical industry in Europe, and they're struggling mightily to meet their decarbonization targets. It's extremely expensive for them because they just don't have these massive solar resources here in Europe that is there in Africa. And there is, people are looking more and more. I mean, here just in Germany right now, like in the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've seen, I think, 3 or 4 calls, like this, hydrogen in Africa, or like methanol in Africa. Like everybody kind of wants to throw money at that because everybody sees this gigantic potential. But I'm not aware of a single, like even pilot stage, like hydrogen producing plant, green hydrogen producing plant. So there's this transformative opportunity, I think. And Mauritania, if you just followed it, like Mauritania has signed an MOU with a company for a hydrogen plant. So where you produce it, for those who don't know, right? So you can transform, you can use the electricity from solar to produce hydrogen, where you take water and you split it, you desalinate it from the ocean, and then you split it into hydrogen, and that you can burn, to produce processed heat. So that's like, a storable energy carrier. And there's been this MOU signed in Mauritania for a 30 gigawatt hydrogen plant, $40 billion, which is 500% of Mauritania's annual GDP. One deal, 500% of your GDP. So just imagine kind of the transformative opportunity that is in this global decarbonization push. And there's extremely little, on the African side that is actually happening on this large scale space. So that's kind of, I think trend and opportunity are quite far, like disconnected there. In Offgrid, I believe that the entrepreneurs are the driving factor and have been the driving factors behind that. Really, the energy access challenge can only be won through entrepreneurs and through the private sector. I'm extremely convinced by that, because neither the international community nor African governments have managed to really succeed at that challenge in the last 30 years. And now kind of this uptick that we're seeing is really driven by the private sector. So there's huge opportunity, and I think most African governments have now appreciated that and are embracing that and are supporting off-grid energy, solutions. So there's been a question in the chat, I think, on this kind of investment focus. That there's certainly like an increasing amount of willingness to do that in the off-grid space. On-grid and large industrial policy, it's a bit beyond me why it's not happening, but currently it's, this is only like starting.
Thank you, Philip. Nicholas, you highlighted that we need to focus more on bioenergy. Is there anything else that you'd like us to focus on?
Pardon?
You mentioned that an emerging trend for us to focus on, or emerging trend would be bioenergy. Is there anything else that you wish to add to that?
Oh yeah, why I mentioned bioenergy is because most of the Africa lies mainly in agriculture. And we have lots of biodegradable waste that can be really used for biogas production, especially in the rural areas, for people not to rely on traditional, biomass for their energy needs, like, firewood and cooking. But on the aspect of, on the trend, when we look at the energy trend, I think countries are trying to integrate lately. If you look at the countries, previously we had the Desert Tech project, which collapsed. But I think a week ago, the African Development Bank, through the African Development Fund, has first, I think, granted some money to countries around the Sahara area to develop energy and integrate solar around 5 countries. If you look at the East Africa, we're having an integration coming up amongst the East African countries. So I think in the years to come, we're going to have more inter-country power integrations going around. Of course, this will be shifting from hydro because looking at the trend in the droughts, water levels cannot sustain the power demands from hydro. So I think we are going to have to look more into solar energy and wind energy. And actually, like I mentioned, solar, we have 40% in Africa and 32% of wind of the entire world is in Africa. If you look at the Horn of Africa and the side of the Morocco and Mauritania, then on the Southern Cape. So the wind potential we have is also appropriately good for us to integrate into our systems.
Thank you, Nicholas. I do apologize. We do have many questions here that I want us to answer from our audience. Catherine, I do believe that you shared the emerging trends that you would like us to focus on. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing that earlier. We have a question from Shmuel. What speakers of the panel think of the possibility of direct governmental investment of African governments in development and construction of solar, water, wave, wind, and other clean electricity power infrastructures? What is today's official policy of African governments in this area? Who would like to take this question?
I can take it. I don't know. Anybody else?
Hi, it's okay. You can go ahead.
Okay, Shakur, I think you wanted to say something too, so maybe I'll just start. So as I said, I mean, if you look at the grand scheme of things, only 3% of electricity, on the African continent comes from solar, from non-hydro renewables, right? So that's solar and wind and bioenergy and wave and and these things exactly. And as we said, hydro also is low emitting, but has huge troubles in terms of droughts and its volatilities in some areas of Africa. So there is now, I think it's important to kind of drill down actually, and to answer that question, you really have to look at, it's quite tough to aggregate it on the African continent, but really look at specific countries. So I think some countries that there's very little happening in this renewable energy on-grid space. Some countries are really, transforming their energy sector. And I do have to say that probably South Africa is probably the one that is most noticeable here. South Africa is a country that is, used to be 99% coal, right? There's all coal based, but they have this massive program called REAP, And this REAP project program, I think it's in its 6th round now, is pretty much a scheme to introduce independent power producers to the African sector, to the South African market, which was predominantly run by Eskom, which is a parastatal utility, to really install a lot of solar and wind power stations. And it's been a massive, already quite a massive transformation, and projected in the next 10 years to really I think they're going to be at around 24%, 25% of generation from solar and wind by 2030, which, given the size of South Africa's economy, is quite quite something, really. So if you look at, if you're really interested in how it can be done, it is interesting. You always hear this criticism: oh, solar, it's too intermittent, it can't power large industries. Well, this is probably the most industrialized country in sub-Saharan Africa, and they're really, banking on solar and wind right now. So it's, it depends on, and it's really official government policy there to really foster this. And then in other countries, I think you see this a bit more interesting, and it might be driven by different things. I think there is not that many countries that really do this for an emissions kind of, style, like just to save emissions, because everybody's saying, Africa has really not contributed a lot of CO2 emissions historically. But if you look at Eswatini, for instance, they're actually doing it to lower their energy dependency on other countries. They don't want to import all their energy anymore. They want to do it domestically. So that's driving their solar drive there. So different, different things happening in some countries more than others.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to end our discussion here and prepare for our next panel discussion on the environment. I would like to thank Catherine, Shakur, Nicholas, and Philip for joining us today, and the audience for joining us and asking such wonderful questions. We will be sharing recordings later on this month. Thank you everyone for joining us. Attendees, please don't leave. In a few minutes' time, we will be beginning our environment panel discussion. Once more, thank you so much, panelists, for joining us today and sharing your expertise with us.